Hey, good morning. How are you today? Spectacular. I like that. That's nice. Hey, it is great to see all of you. Sorry, I started my iPad at the wrong spot, and I got to go through the whole thing because I don't know how to get it to stop. So anyways, there we go. Hey, I'm Paul, one of the pastors here, and really nice to see you. You guys sounded amazing, by the way. I'm right there, and I'm like, I could hear all of this coming. You guys sounded awesome. So, and you look all right. You look good, too. So I am honored to be talking to you today in our series called Make Room. Today, I'm going to be talking about family. Now, I know sometimes listening to a sermon is almost like reading the summary of a book, right? There's this big old book, and then you read the summary, decide if you're going to buy the book, right? And so really today, I hope it's not too much of a fire hose, because my prayer is that it inspires us to go deeper in the life in Christ and making room for God in our homes. And so that's kind of so you're thinking, oh boy, we're in for it. So, hey, can I show you a photo of my kids? Let me do this. There's four. Yeah. This is my favorite photo. How many of you are the ones that my eyes are always closed in a photo? Madison is on the left. She's the oldest. That's the birth order, actually, right, left to right. But Maddie, Dayton, Landon, Morgan, and this was taken not too long ago. It's my favorite picture of them ever. One, because I see each personality reflected in there, and then two, they wanted to get together. They got together. They just had a good night, and they love doing that with one another. That photo right there is evidence of great blessing. I look at that and it's just like, what immense blessing. That photo is also evidence of unspeakable grace. Wow. From 16 to 26 years old, unspeakable grace in the home. And of all days, none of them are here today. So, talking about family, none of them are here today. Our oldest, Madison, and our son-in-law, Andrew, are having our granddaughter, Hallie, dedicated at their church this morning. And so no way Gigi's missing that. And so they're all over there. I begged David, please, can I switch so I can go to my granddaughter? And he said, no. I'm just kidding. That didn't happen. It didn't happen. I think this is the first time he's hearing about it because I didn't bring it up because it's kind of short notice, right? So he's such a tyrant. So, but no, I'm just kidding. People have told me, we've sat down with people and they talk to Vicki and me and they're like, you guys ought to write a book on parenting, because they see that our kids are doing well, they're well adjusted, they still like hanging out together. We all like to get together. We're going today, we're going to take everybody, the whole family, out to lunch today and stuff and stuff. We all love each other. They're moving along nicely with their lives. But honestly, I don't know what a book like that would be like. I don't know what I would really have to say so much. But here I am preaching about family, We're in this series called Make Room. We're taking a look at Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 6. In verse 19, it says this, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. For where moths and vermin, where they do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And the idea is making room in our hearts for that which we treasure, really for more of God. And I'm sure you've heard many sermons heard this. A lot of people use this when they're talking about money. Treasure, but we're not talking about, treasure. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, because Jesus doesn't use that word. He doesn't use, the Greek word in here is not money at all. It literally is an entire different word, and it indicates treasures of the heart. whatever you cherish, whatever has a prominent place in your heart. For some people, it could be money, right? But that which you give your attention to. And I'm working from the assumption that we all treasure our families to some degree, okay? And today I want to talk about my greatest treasure on earth, and that would be my family. But okay, I'm not going to just talk about my family, but the concept of family and how the idea of making room fits with that. And so some of you are thinking, wait, David said this is kind of an undercover Lent series. We give up things for, are you saying I can give up my family for Lent? Yeah. Man. No, not saying that. So please don't leave here saying, I'm going to take a break. So don't do that. So we're talking about making room for one another, making room for forgiveness and grace, making room for, this is a big one, differences, and how all of that works together to make room for more of God in your home. But I also understand that it's not always good. Treasuring family from family to family might look different. I understand that some in the room might even say, my family's not on that list of things I treasure, My assumption would be that a lot of that may pertain to extended family, but at the same time, there can be some bad stuff between parents and children, especially adult children and parents, all right? There can be a lot of bitterness present. We can carry a lot of baggage from that. But can I tell you this? Here's a little secret. We all, to some degree, have baggage. I'm not minimizing yours, but my kids have baggage. They sure do. Part of what I do as a dad is create content for future therapy. I am what the young people call a content creator. And so even though there's a perception that everything's amazing and Vicki and I ought to write a book, we have our issues just the same. Vicki and I were having a discussion in the kitchen with one of the kids not too long ago. All right, discussion. And Vicki and the child were having a discussion. And at some point, they wanted my input. And I've been at this long enough. I should have known better and been like, no, sorry, nope. But I didn't, okay? Because it was late, I wanted to go to bed and all this kind of stuff, and I'm listening and stuff. And somewhere in the course of that discussion, I got tired of the back and forth. It was the same thing going back and forth. Anybody identify? Same thing back and forth, going nowhere. And I'm like, okay, listen, and I did this. Don't do that. Don't do that. Listen. I was in a bad headspace. It's one of two things. It's A or it's B. If A, then this. If B, then that, right? Which is it going to be? And I don't know, I crossed some sort of a estrogenic line there, and the heads just kind of turned toward me and there were tears, lots of tears, and I was really confused, Now, I grew up with a decision maker. My dad was a no-nonsense special forces kind of guy. He was literally in the special forces. He had to make life and death decisions like that, okay? Feelings, what's that, right? It's like growing up with Major Payne. You ever seen the movie Major Payne? Sensitive, Watch the movie, you'll get it. But his thing was, his favorite, one of his many favorite lines was, end of story, Here's how it's going to be. End of story. And then my sister and I would be in our rooms for the rest of the night, That's what it was like growing up as a Gen Xer, we grew up, Gen Xers, we grew up different, Something about drinking from the garden hose put some microscopic something in our blood and in our brain. And, and I don't know if I heard it here. Maybe you mentioned this, or maybe I heard it somewhere else, so I was reminded. There used to be a 10 p.m. family roll call on television. Remember that? It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? And it's like mom and dad were like, oh yeah, where are the kids? Could you imagine doing that today? We were outside in the cold playing lawn darts in the dark is what we were doing, locked out of the house because we weren't allowed in, right? And we lived in the next town over from all our friends. Very rural. I grew up inside. So there was the big town and the little town, and we lived outside of the little town. It was kind of like if you remember Mount Mayberry and Mount Pilot was the big town. That's what it was. And we lived out of the little town. And we lived in the next town over. And when my sister and I were friends, we would have to make a collect call to the next town, all right? You remember, collect call. Back in the day, we had what was known as long distance calls, all right? I know that's another strange term, right? But the first 3 digits of your 10-digit phone number is called an area code. We lived just across the county line in a different area code. Therefore, it was a long distance call, which meant you had to pay money to make that call. And they say it's more expensive today. But if you wanted the other person to pay, the one who receiving the call, it was called a collect call. Everybody loved those, collect call. And so when we were hanging out with friends, my sister and I, usually in Mount Pilot and calling Mayberry. And so we would have to find a payphone, make a collect call, all right? And we would press 0, talk to a live operator. I'd like to make a collect call. Yeah, what's your name? Pizza Hut. And so they get on the line, they dial a number. You have a collect call from Pizza Hut. Do you accept the charges? And my mom, because my dad never answered the phone, my mom was, no, thank you. And she'd hang up. 20 minutes later, Dad would show up in the Pizza Hut parking lot to pick us up, you know. That's how we worked the system. Yeah. You did it too. You did that too, right? Hi, Dad, 5 more minutes? Get in the car. Because he was like, I had to get over here, you know, it's late. 5 more minutes, Dad? Get in the car. My coat is still in the booth inside Pizza Hut, all right? But there's no way I can go back to get it, all right? But I'm gonna get in trouble for leaving my coat at Pizza Hut. Halfway home, where's your coat? He knows where my coat is. It's in the booth at Pizza Hut. We paid good money for that coat. You better hope they have it when we get back, because I ain't gonna buy you another one. You're just gonna be cold, right? What do you have to say for yourself? I'm sorry. I didn't ask for character reference. What do you have to say for yourself? I don't know. You guess? I'm sorry. I'm having a flashback. So let me move forward. But the idea was controlling the conversation, right? And, honestly, Special Forces guy, he saw some crazy stuff. If he's in combat situation, you don't lose control. You maintain control of it, and your enemy is out of control, and that's how you do it. It's not like he was a control freak, because honestly, he wasn't. To his credit, I think he was doing a really great job of dealing with PTSD, something that we never talked about that day. PTSD from, blowing up bad guys in Beirut, But when it came to conflict, it was all about control. In fact, most conflict was a reaction to feeling like he was losing control of the situation. And that night with the discussion, I was having a similar experience here. I was getting ready the next morning, and I just kind of had one of those aha moments when it hit me. I was trying to control instead of understand. And there's a big difference there. Those are two different things. When you're thinking about understanding, you're not thinking about control at all. And the reverse is true. When you're thinking about control, there's no thought of understanding in there either. I think if we could grasp that somehow, a lot of homes would be a lot more peaceful. There really were 2 clear choices, A and B. But the issue was deeper than that. And whether it's with marriage or with kids, Stephen Covey's advice in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, if you haven't read it, read it. Old book, but still amazing. One of the 7 habits is seek first to understand, then be understood. And you can't do that if you're trying to control everything here, or just end everything, The job description, now listen, I'm talking a lot about families, a lot about parenting, and I understand that we're all in different situations in life where, it's like, well, that doesn't really apply to me. This stuff, I believe, can apply definitely to the direct application of parents and kids and families and stuff, but it can apply to your neighbor, your coworker, extended family, whatever, And so if that's not your exact situation, take it in as the people in your sphere, okay? But specifically as a parent, the job description of a parent can be summed up as the gradual process of releasing control over a period of years. The gradual process, I should have put that on the screen, write it down. The gradual process of releasing control over a period of years. Our goal is for kids to be, now I got that from the book, and some like it, some don't. I learned a lot from it, Parenting with Love and Logic, another good book. But our goal is for our kids to be healthy, functioning, maybe even successful adults, and in the Christian home, we would also add that kids who love God, right? None of that can be guaranteed, not any of it. But I've wondered, in relationship to all of those goals, what kind of correlation is there between when it comes to my ability and willingness to slowly release control over the course of their lives at home? The wise Princess Leia once said, "The more you tighten your grip, Tark, the more," you know this by heart, you don't have to look at that. "The more star system," well, I don't know what this says users there. "The more star systems will slip through your fingers." You remember that, right? Star Wars. Am I alone here? Gosh. Okay. The more you tighten your grip. Now, it didn't work out so well with her own kid, but she made a great point, all right? But what do I mean about the gradual release of control over a period of years? It means that when our kids are young, we control every part of their lives, right? If we don't, they die, okay? Now, my little grandbaby, Hallie, obviously advanced, all right? But at this point in her life, she can't make her own food, you put it in front of her, she'll take it and she'll chew it and stuff, then she'll smile and it falls out and stuff. But anyways, so mom and dad control that. But it would be so weird if at age 18, it's like, "All right, Hallie, here comes a choo-choo, open up." You're not going to do that. So there is a release of control over a period of years in a family. This idea is that the idea is that by the time they're ready to leave home, they're able to survive on their own and make their own decisions because they've already been doing that for a while, right? Now listen, I hope I don't mean to start conflict in the home. If you're a teenager in the home, give it time before you bring it up, okay? These things. But I didn't start out this way, all right? I don't know about moms, but as a dad, I often felt like I needed to make sure my kids were ready for the real world, right? It's my job to prepare them for the real world. And I would start out with, do it this way, and all this kind of stuff. And maybe there's some aspect to that, but even through teenage years, there was this conflict because I was trying to control how they did things, and you can do this and not that and all of this. And if they made a mistake, it would turn into, how in the world do you think that's going to work out in an unforgiving real world where you got one shot, and don't use the excuse that you're 6 years old, right? Our oldest looks at our youngest and she's like, "They let you get away with so much." And we do. And that's all we say. We're like, "Yeah." That's all we say. Because we've learned that mistakes as a 6-year-old probably won't destroy their lives, okay? We've learned that mistakes are absolutely essential. And in the home, there's that a little bit of protection of, you made your decision, wasn't a great decision. You're experiencing some consequence because of that. We're here as somewhat of a covering over that, And so when they get out and they're kind of genuinely on their own, they can handle the consequences on their own and hopefully avoid them. But where would I be without all of the mistakes that I've made in my life, right? There was some that's like, "God, I don't know if that was just me blowing it or you changed it all and made it look like my mistake, but thank you so much that didn't work out the way I thought," right? I'm much better off because of many of the mistakes that I've made in life. And all of this happens in the course of everyday life. There's no manual to being a parent. They say, I wish there was a manual to being a parent. There's not, because you can't teach kids. You can't help your kids grow from a textbook, all right? It happens as they watch, experience, try, fail, watch some more, try again. This is also how we approach faith formation in the home. Vicki and I, we kind of adopted the famous verse that I think has already been mentioned in this series, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Starting in verse 5, it says this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. And the word, I'm going to pause. The word impress is not impress. It's not this force it. It's not this drive this point home. The word literally means, the Hebrew word literally means sharpen. Sharpen. By this, your children will be sharpened, okay? Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads, right? And they literally would do that. Write them on the door frames of your houses and your gates, all right? Sharpen. And when you talk about, just when you talk about it, just whenever the occasion arises is when it comes up, you know? We put reminders of God's goodness and stuff around the home maybe, but something happens and we just have an occasion to talk about God. Skip down toward the end of the chapter. I'll get more into that. Verse 20 says, in the future, when your son asks you, son or daughter, what's the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws of the Lord our God that he commanded you? Tell him, tell him your story. We were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes, the Lord sent signs and wonders, great and terrible, on Egypt and Pharaoh and his whole household. But he brought us out from there to bring us in and give us the land he promised on oath to our ancestors. The Lord commanded us to obey all these decrees and to fear the Lord our God, so that we might always prosper and be kept alive, as is the case today. And if we are careful to obey all of this law before the Lord our God as he commanded us, that will be our righteousness. Now, we know that obeying all of the law and doing the good things, that's not where our righteousness comes from anymore, right? Christ fulfilled those kinds of things. Our obedience, the things that we do, is our response, not a condition, right? So when when your kid wonders, why do you do certain things? Do what they did. They didn't start with, doctrine and theology. They just shared their story, We talked about this in the Fathers in Action class last week, I think it was, or week before last. Sharing our story. Fathers in Action is a great class. Matt Ellis is leading. Get with him about it. It's 8:30. I don't know if it's too late to get involved in that or not, but ask me about it. But parents don't often feel qualified to talk about God because there's this thing of, I don't feel qualified. I don't know anything. I don't know doctrine. What if they ask me a hard question and I don't know? Or there's this, I mess up so much, right? But you have a story, all right? You have a story, a God story to your life. Why do we go to, Mom, Dad, why do we go to church every Sunday? Why are you reading the Bible? Why did you go out of your way to help that person? One time we had a tithe check and one of the kids saw it and they were like, why are you doing this? What I could have with this? How many toys I could have with this? Now, do you have a story that answers those questions? Or is it, that's just what we do as Christians, Because if it's a rule, it'll get old. But if it's a true story of faith connecting to life, that's going to stick. People talk about, and there's so many studies have gone into, and countless hours have gone into, why do kids, graduate high school or college and then graduate from the faith? Why are they leaving the faith? And the church looks at the home, and the home looks at the church, and all these kind of things. Can I tell you what I think is the biggest reason? Is because they've not experienced a faith that connects to real life. You have that opportunity. We have that opportunity as a church where it's like we have a story. It's not just a set of rules of, this is what we do as Christians and we got to do that. If it's a rule, it's going to get old. but a true story that connects faith to real life. That sticks. That stays with us. That gets inside of us. Just be willing to share it. So that's the gist of my book, okay? It's one really short chapter. Talk, okay? Talk. I wish I had more to tell you about this. I mean, I do. I'm not done preaching yet, but I'm kind of glad that I don't have a lot of explanation because all of us can do this, all right? As you share your story and live openly with all of your mistakes and shortcomings, they begin to see Christ in you. It's not necessarily about them seeing you, watching you, and doing everything that you do. It's never been our approach, at least, because I don't want them to have my faith, all right? I want them to have faith. I want them to see Christ, not me, right? Now, they see Christ. I understand how that goes together, but they begin to see Christ, even in your mess-ups. Our failures emphasize grace. In fact, watching you fall short and get back up again, reaching out for grace and forgiveness, giving grace and forgiveness and all of that and everything that comes with that, there's nothing more impactful that you can impress upon your children and your family than that. Your neighbors, your coworkers, than that. So if you don't feel qualified to lead spiritually, you're just right. Okay? 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, Paul talks about this thorn in the flesh, you know. Some people have sanitized it and said, it was poor eyesight. Paul had poor eyesight, so poor guy. I'm like, come on, you know. As I'm reading this, the man struggled with sin, all right? That which I don't want to do, that's what I keep on doing, he said in Romans 7, right? So, I mean, he struggled with sin and he pleaded, God, I don't want this anymore. Take it away from me. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, but God said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. Sufficient for you, sufficient for your home. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. And why would we be afraid to let our kids see that? You know? That's when they have the chance to see Christ in you the most. Real life, everyday life, hardcore, sometimes not always great life. That's when they see Christ in us. Not in your perfection, because that's not real. In your imperfections, right? Is this coming through? You getting this? As they see Christ in you, it's also important for you to see Christ in them. Your kids and your spouse, image bearers of God. How would that change the way we interacted with our families? Image bearers of God, you know? This is how we should see all people, but especially those of our own family. So let me tell you what I see in my family. That photo that I saw, my wife, I could include that. My son-in-law, Andrew, I can include that in there. You know, 2 really cool, awesome, sweet girlfriends that I could include in there, maybe 2. Not mine, right? Boys. So. But here's what I see in my family. 6 of us. 7, son-in-law, 7 people who live out their faith very differently than I do, which is so cool, which I'm so happy about. Because if it was about my success as a parent, my success and me, then I would stand here and I would tell you that they all live their faith just like me, right? But if anything, I hope I've inspired them to seek the Lord for themselves so they can wade into those deep waters, lift their feet, and let the current just sweep them in God's awesome life, right? Paul, that sounds scary. What if they join a Pentecostal church? You know, something like that, right? I got to control. Ooh, there's that word again. How do I control that? How do I you don't, right? You just don't. One of our kids, you're going to have to listen to the podcast to get this, all right? So this story here I'm going to skip because I don't have a lot of time. But listen to the podcast. I got a cool story about that, all right? But this Make Room series, like we said, is kind of an undercover Lent series. And during Lent, we ask ourselves, what am I going to give up? And the idea is that we give up something in order to make room for God, okay? Again, not giving up families, but here are some things to consider, all right? And I'm just going to hit these pretty quick, all right? Here are some things to consider. I'm going to give up the illusion of the perfect family, all right? None of us, neither of us have that. That's not our goal, right? That's just not it. Sometimes I think, especially with little kids, they mess up. It's like, well, because they're little kids, all right? Not perfect. Number 2, the thief of distractions. I know I didn't talk about this a lot. David actually talked about this in week 1. Well, one aspect of what can be a distraction in week 1, anything that hinders engagement with one another, Could be the technology, could be work, could be just personal pursuits, hobbies, that kind of stuff that just take us away. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but 3, the trap of comparisons. Don't compare your family to mine or any other. You probably wouldn't enjoy living with us, okay? Probably wouldn't enjoy living with you. And please don't ask my kids what it was like. Oh gosh, no, don't do that. 4, the darkness of isolation. That's a dark place to be, Let me give you once again the free audio version of my book. Talk, okay? Just talk. And then 5, and this is what we spent most time on today, the futility of control. Just the futility of control. Job rightly said in this, I think it's Job chapter 12, yeah. He said, in his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. In his hand. Your family, your kids, your spouse, you can include your neighbors and coworkers, friends. In his hand is their life and their breath, yours as well. In his hand, trust that. Trust that. Now, I understand. My personality sets me up pretty well for this stuff. I'm a kind of a whatever kind of guy, Free spirit, let's do ever. That looks fun. Hold my beer kind of guy, That's me, right? And I know that this has kind of been a little lighthearted look, but I know it's a serious issue in many homes. And I know control can be a serious, a deep thing. And I know sometimes personalities have a lot to do with that. And I honestly believe there's no wrong personalities and things. But hopefully, like I said, a sermon like this is like reading the summary of a book. And I understand, I told you, I don't know what I would put in a book. There are volumes that could be written out of this sermon, right? And I know we've just kind of got the summary of that. But my prayer, my hope is that it just instigates something inside of us to kind of go deeper, seek deeper on our own. One of those 5 things, if you want to put those back up again, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Let's put those back up on the screen. Which one resonates with you? Well, we will, maybe. Anyways, but let me get to you. The illusion of a perfect family, the thief of distractions, there it is. The trap of comparisons, darkness of isolation, the futility of control. Is it one of those? Maybe it gets your mind going. Is there something else? What resonates with you the most? In your home, man, God's gift. That's where, honestly, the most frustration we'll experience comes from our home, doesn't it? And the most joy and fulfillment and satisfaction comes from those same people, And so it's one of those paradoxes. Family is kind of a paradox, right? 2 things that shouldn't be together, but they are. Deep fulfillment, deep frustration, all together. Hallelujah, But we can't control our other family members just as anymore we can't control our boss or coworkers or neighbors, right? But I can work on myself here, I can take a deep breath. The life of my family is in his hands. Their breath is in his hands, I don't have to be perfect to lead. Thank God, because I'm not. I don't have to be perfect to lead. In fact, it's my imperfections, it's my failures and how I respond to them and how I reach out to God through those that makes the greatest impact on those around me, particularly my family. And so I have a lot to be grateful for when it comes to that. But I tell you, just like I said about that photo, yeah, it's great blessing. It's unimaginable grace, And I know that's your story. Some of you have been down the road farther, longer than I have, and you're like, yeah. Some of you are just starting this, and you're like, I just don't see how. But God is with you. Let me pray with you. Lord, I thank you for your presence. I thank you that you are good, you are faithful, you are perfect, you are absolutely holy. Because, Lord, I know that I'm not. And my family, the one thing that can bring out all of those imperfections the most in me is my family, or my response sometimes to my family. The people that I love the most in this world. Lord, I pray for those who today may be struggling in this area. Man, in a group this size, there's got to be somewhere that's the biggest source of heartbreak and heartache in their lives right now. For some, this might have been a tough sermon to sit through. And Lord, no matter what the situation is, we look to you today. God, I want to give up the futility of control here. I can't control this. I'm not going to compare myself to others, my family to others, Lord. I'm just going to love well. I'm going to offer grace. I'm going to offer forgiveness. I'm going to ask for it maybe. I want to do my best to live for you and let my life shine, Lord. And trust that, God, you're the one that's ultimately in control here. You're the one that's leading. Man, it's sometimes hard to know exactly how to pray in these situations. But Lord, you know every heart, you know every home that's represented here, every relationship, every marriage. And I just pray for your peace to flood in, that we would just, with open hands, release control, release all of these things, God. Will you do that right now? Maybe you say, God's not really been a part of our home. We've not really inserted, or whatever you want to say, how you want to put it. We've not prioritized Jesus in the home. I would just invite you to start. You say, well, I don't know exactly how to do. Well, this is the beginning of your story. It's a beautiful story. And your family has an opportunity to walk it together. So we invite you in, Lord. Take control as we release it. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.